They say kindness is strength, that being agreeable is admirable, that the man who always says yes is the one people will respect, remember, and love. But let's step back and look closer. Because in reality, that kind of man, the one who's always available, always agreeable, always accommodating, is rarely respected, rarely remembered, and almost never loved for who he really is. Instead, he's overlooked, taken for granted, used, and the most brutal part, he doesn't even realize it until it's far too late. There's a quiet kind of erosion that happens to a man who believes that saying yes to everything will protect his relationships, who confuses being passive with being virtuous. He tells himself he's doing the right thing, being the bigger person, keeping the peace. But in truth, he's trading pieces of himself every day. His time, his energy, his voice, given away without boundaries, without question, without hesitation. Not because he's noble, but because he's afraid. Afraid to upset anyone, afraid to be called selfish, afraid to say no. And what does the world do with a man like that? It moves on, without apology, without loyalty, without respect. They like that he's easy. They like that he never pushes back. But when it's time to choose someone they admire, someone they follow, he's not even in the running. Because being too nice isn't a strength, it's a liability. It marks you as someone who can be bent, who can be managed, who will swallow his truth just to make others comfortable. And let's be brutally honest, the world does not admire comfort seekers. It admires clarity, conviction, boundaries. The man who spends his life trying to be liked ends up invisible. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, he begins to disappear from his own life. You see it in his eyes, that tired resignation. The smile that doesn't reach past the surface, the years spent being the nice guy, with nothing to show for it but stress, missed opportunities, and a quiet bitterness he never speaks aloud. This isn't humility, it's surrender. And the truth is, surrender doesn't earn peace, it invites disrespect. Now that doesn't mean a man must become cold, or cruel, or hard just for the sake of it. Stoicism doesn't teach that. But it does teach this: if it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. Marcus Aurelius. In other words, if saying yes isn't honest, it's not virtuous. If pleasing others means betraying yourself, it's not kindness, it's cowardice. And here's the danger most men never see coming. By the time you realize how much of yourself you've given away, there's often not much left to reclaim. This video isn't about becoming heartless. It's about becoming whole again. It's about identifying the subtle signs that a man has gone too far in the name of being nice. The signs that he's been conditioned to erase himself for the comfort of others. The signs that he's lost the edge he needs, not to hurt others, but to protect himself. Because without that edge, he will be exploited. So if you've ever felt that quiet frustration, if you've ever swallowed your truth to avoid conflict, if you've ever looked in the mirror and wondered when exactly you stopped standing up for yourself, this message is for you, not to shame you, but to wake you up. Because there's still time to change, still time to reclaim your voice, still time to stop being liked for the wrong reasons and start being respected for the right ones. This is the true Stoic way, unfiltered, unapologetic, and absolutely necessary for any man who refuses to keep living as a doormat in his own life. If you believe respect matters more than approval, if you're ready to draw your line and defend it, then make sure to subscribe for more content like this. Because today we're going to break down 6 subtle signs that a man has become too nice, and how that dangerous habit is slowly draining his self-respect. Let's get into it. Sign 1. He can't say no without feeling guilty. You can always tell when a man has forgotten how to say no. It's not in his voice, it's in his eyes. The weight doesn't show up as anger or outbursts. It shows up as quiet exhaustion, a subtle weariness that clings to every movement. He's the kind of man who always smiles, always nods, always agrees, but behind that polite exterior, he's dying a little more each day. And it's not because he's generous, not because he's noble, it's because he's afraid. afraid of being seen as difficult, afraid of letting people down, afraid of becoming the villain in someone else's story. Take Martin, for example. Martin was dependable, the kind of man every team wanted, the kind of friend you could call at 11 p.m. and know he'd pick up. At work, he was the one who always covered the late shifts, the weekend projects, the last-minute crises. He volunteered for meetings he didn't need to attend, said yes to things no one else wanted to touch. He wore that role like a badge of honor. But over time, the cracks showed. His back hurt from stress. His face aged faster than it should have. His kids stopped asking if he'd come to their soccer games. His wife, once full of patience, had grown distant, tired of being a background character in Martin's overcommitted life. And yet, he kept saying yes. Why? Because somewhere deep down, Martin had internalized a dangerous lie. That being agreeable would make people respect him. That being available made him valuable. That being liked was the same as being loved. But what he failed to see is this. Every time he said yes to someone else's needs, he was saying no to his own. No to rest, no to his family, no to his health, no to his peace. And the people around him, they noticed. Not his suffering, just his reliability. Martin had become predictable, an easy yes, the man who would bend over backward, then apologize for not bending further. His bosses loved it until it came time to promote someone. They didn't choose Martin, not because he wasn't capable, but because they didn't see a leader. They saw a workhorse, someone who would quietly shoulder the burdens of others without asking for recognition or rest. And when Martin finally collapsed, burnt out, bitter, and barely holding it together, no one was there to carry him. The same people who once leaned on him simply moved on. That's the reality of being too agreeable. You're useful until you're not. You're liked until you ask for something back. And when you finally break, you're replaced. This isn't a unique story, it's epidemic. Men like Martin are everywhere. Mild-mannered, overcommitted, quietly resentful. They go through life mistaking compliance for character, mistaking people-pleasing for purpose, mistaking exhaustion for virtue. But Stoic philosophy tears through that illusion like a blade. If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. Marcus Aurelius. Let that sink in. It's not just a call to stop lying to others. It's a command to stop lying to yourself. To stop saying yes when your gut screams no. To stop calling fear kindness. To stop labeling your people-pleasing tendencies as empathy. The Stoics understood that integrity isn't about keeping everyone happy. It's about staying true to what's right, even when it makes you unpopular, even when it disappoints people, even when it costs you approval. Because a man who cannot say no is not free. He's enslaved by the expectations of others. And over time, that slavery wears him down until he can't even recognize himself in the mirror. He becomes a hollow shell shaped by obligation, defined by other people's demands, and void of personal agency. Martin didn't lose his life in one tragic moment. He lost it in pieces every time he smiled and said, "Sure, no problem," when what he really wanted to say was, "No, not this time, not again." But he couldn't, because he believed that a real man never disappoints, never says no, never puts himself first. He was wrong. A real man understands that boundaries are not selfish, they're sacred. He knows that saying no to the wrong things is how you say yes to the right things. Yes to your health, yes to your family, yes to your inner peace. And that kind of man, he doesn't need applause, because he already has something far more powerful, self-respect. So ask yourself, when was the last time you said no? Without guilt, without apology, without needing to explain yourself to people who never explain themselves to you? If that question makes you uncomfortable, good. That means something inside you is still awake, still capable of reclaiming your time, your boundaries, your worth. Because here's the truth most men never hear. You don't owe anyone an explanation for protecting your peace. You don't owe the world your exhaustion. And you damn sure don't owe your self-respect to people who only call you when they need something. You owe it to yourself to say no, to mean it, and to walk away when you must, because that's not selfish, it's stoic. And once a man embraces that truth, he stops being a servant to everyone's expectations and starts becoming something else entirely, a man who stands his ground. Up next, the second sign, one that's even harder to spot, because it doesn't show up in what you do, but in how you see yourself. And if you're ready to confront that, stay with us. This is True Stoic Way, and we're just getting started. Sign 2, he apologizes for existing. Watch closely and you'll see it. He enters the room with small steps, eyes down, shoulders slightly hunched, as if trying to make himself smaller. His voice is soft, uncertain, almost a whisper. Before he says anything, he clears his throat. Then comes the word, sorry. He hasn't even spoken his mind, and already he's apologizing for it. This man isn't rude, he isn't reckless, he isn't loud, but he also isn't seen. Not really. He's the kind of man people forget was even in the meeting. The one whose ideas are always interrupted. The one who says, sorry, just a quick thought, before offering something no one listens to. And while the world may describe him as polite, considerate, or humble, what they really mean is this: he's invisible. Not because he lacks value, but because he's trained himself to believe he doesn't deserve space unless he's invited. That his opinions are burdens, that his needs are inconvenient, that his very presence is something to apologize for. And it starts small, apologizing for bumping into someone, for speaking up, for asking a question, for having an idea that contradicts the room. But over time, it metastasizes. He apologizes for needing help, for wanting better, for having boundaries, for being there at all. This isn't humility. This is erasure. There's a fine line between selflessness and self-erasure. And too many men, especially those raised to be the strong, silent, supportive type, never notice when they have crossed it. Selflessness is a choice, a strength. It's what happens when a man, fully aware of his worth, decides to give, not because he lacks needs, but because he's secure enough to set them aside for a moment in service of something greater. But self-erasure? That's what happens when a man no longer believes his needs matter at all. When he's convinced that his role is only to support, absorb, and yield. He doesn't speak unless asked. He doesn't challenge what he disagrees with. He doesn't express what he wants, because deep down he believes he has no right to want. And the world responds accordingly. They don't reward this man for being nice. They don't cherish his humility. They simply learn to walk around him, to speak over him, to treat his silence as consent. Because when you present yourself as someone who doesn't matter, people believe you. This pattern is especially common in men who've spent their lives serving others. The quiet husband, the reliable employee, the steady friend who never asks for anything in return. He's praised for being easygoing. But what they don't see is the quiet ache inside him. The dull resentment that grows every time he bites his tongue. Every time he says, it's fine, when it's not. Every time he apologizes. Not because he's wrong, but because he's afraid of being seen as too much. Over the years, this wears a man down. He stops making eye contact. He stops speaking up in groups. He stops expecting respect and begins accepting tolerance. And there is no dignity in being tolerated. Because being tolerated is what happens when people let you be present, but not heard. When they allow you into the room, but never invite you to lead. When they smile politely, but never ask what you really think. This isn't peace, this is quiet desperation. And the Stoics, they had no tolerance for that kind of living. It is the power of the mind to be unconquerable. Seneca. An unconquerable mind doesn't shrink to make others comfortable. It doesn't apologize for its weight. It doesn't flinch when others look disapprovingly. A Stoic man doesn't dominate a room, but he never disappears in it either. He speaks with intention, not fear. He listens with strength, not submission. He understands that silence has value, but only when it's chosen, not when it's a habit of avoidance. Too many men confuse disappearing with being honorable. But there is no honor in being forgettable. You were not born to be a background character in your own life. You are not meant to live in fear of offending someone just by existing. And yet, that's exactly what's happening. Because every time a man apologizes for being, for asking, for existing, he's training the world to ignore him. And worse, he's training himself to believe he deserves to be ignored. Let's be clear, you are not wrong for wanting to be heard. You are not selfish for having needs. You are not arrogant for standing tall. What's arrogant is the world expecting you to serve, support, and suffer in silence, and calling it virtue. So here's the truth. You don't need to raise your voice. You don't need to become someone else, but you do need to stop disappearing. Because a man who disappears for too long starts to believe he was never there to begin with. And once that belief sets in, it's hard to shake. But if you're still listening, if something inside you is stirring, it means you're not gone. Not yet. You can reclaim your presence. You can stand. You can speak. You can occupy space, not with arrogance, but with calm, immovable conviction. And when you do, people will start to notice. Some will feel threatened. Others will feel uncomfortable. But the right people, the ones worth having in your life, will finally see you. Not as a footnote, but as a man who no longer apologizes for existing. Coming up next, the third sign, a habit that wears the mask of peace, but is really just the fear of conflict. And if you've ever swallowed your truth to avoid making waves, what comes next may hit closer to home than you expect. This is true Stoic way, and we're not here to help you blend in. We're here to help you stand up. Sign 3. He avoids conflict at all costs. At first glance, he seems like the calm one, the composed one, the level-headed man who never raises his voice, never causes trouble, never starts an argument. People might even admire him for it, call him mature, easygoing, a real peacemaker. But look closer, because beneath that calm is something else, something quieter, colder, and far more dangerous. Fear, not of violence, not of chaos, but of discomfort. This is the man who avoids conflict not because he's at peace, but because he's terrified of confrontation. You'll see it in the way he phrases his sentences, softly, with built-in exits. I don't mean to be difficult, but maybe it's just me, but he leaves room to retreat before he's even finished speaking. You'll see it in the way he smiles when someone crosses a line, pretending not to notice. In the way he agrees too quickly, just to keep things smooth. In the way he backs down, even when he knows he's right. This isn't diplomacy, it's surrender, dressed up as manners. And it comes at a backstory because the moment a man starts trading truth for ease, he begins losing himself. Every time he swallows his discomfort instead of speaking up. Every time he lets a comment slide to keep the peace. Every time he says it's fine when it clearly isn't. He teaches people something dangerous. He teaches them they can do it again. Human beings are social creatures. We calibrate quickly. We notice who pushes back and who folds. And when someone realizes that a man won't defend his boundaries, they stop respecting them. Worse, they stop seeing them at all. They interrupt him without hesitation. They speak over him. They dismiss his contributions in meetings. They make jokes at his expense. And he laughs along because it's easier than drawing a line. But that line matters because peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of boundaries and the willingness to enforce them. This is what Stoic philosophy teaches with ruthless clarity. If you are disturbed by external things, it is not they that trouble you, but your own judgment of them. Marcus Aurelius. The Stoic doesn't run from discomfort. He doesn't hide from tension. He doesn't pretend things are okay when they're not. He sees clearly, and sometimes clarity demands confrontation. Not violence, not rage, not theatrics, but a steady, unmoving stance. A simple, firm, that's not acceptable. Because when a man avoids every conflict, what he's really doing is prioritizing other people's comfort over his own integrity. And with each silent moment, he erodes a little more of his backbone. Let's be honest, most men don't fear the fight itself, they fear what the fight will cost them. They're afraid of being seen as too much, afraid of the tension in the room, afraid of making people uncomfortable. So they make themselves small instead. But the truth is, discomfort is the price of being taken seriously. No one respects the man who avoids every hard moment. No one fears crossing him. No one wonders where he stands because he never plants his feet. And when people know you won't push back, they stop asking for permission. They just take. They take your time. They take your credit. They take your silence as a green light, and they keep going. Until one day you look around and realize you've become the man everyone walks over to get what they want because you taught them they could. That's not peace, that's submission. It's a quiet betrayal of the self, and it adds up. One ignored slight becomes a pattern. One unchecked insult becomes a culture. One avoided conflict becomes a life of being overlooked. So what's the alternative? It's not becoming aggressive, it's becoming anchored. It's knowing when to speak and doing it, even if your voice shakes. It's understanding that boundaries don't announce themselves. They are enforced, not with shouting, but with clarity. A Stoic doesn't seek out conflict, but he refuses to retreat from it when the line is crossed. Because real peace, it's earned, not by yielding, but by standing. That doesn't mean you confront every annoyance. It means you decide what matters and you protect it. With words, with silence, with presence. And when you do, people notice. They start choosing their words more carefully. They stop making jokes at your expense. They stop assuming you'll always stay quiet because they've met the real you. Not the version who keeps the room comfortable, but the man who keeps himself intact. So if you've been biting your tongue to keep the peace, ask yourself, has it worked? Are you respected? Or are you just easier to ignore? Because a man who avoids conflict at all costs will pay with something far more precious than approval, his self-respect. And once that's gone, there's no applause loud enough to replace it. Coming up next, a sign that hides in plain sight. One that looks like charm, flexibility, friendliness, but is really just another mask for fear. It's the craving to be liked by everyone, and it's more destructive than you think. Stick around. This is True Stoic Way, and we're here to reclaim strength, one truth at a time. Sign 4. He lives to be liked by everyone. He walks into the room and immediately scans the crowd, not for threats, not for opportunity, but for approval. He watches faces, mirrors moods, adjusts his tone depending on who's listening. He doesn't speak to express himself, he speaks to avoid friction. This is the man who's mastered the art of fitting in. He's likable, agreeable, smooth. He always knows what to say because he's spent years rehearsing what people want to hear. And for a while it works. People invite him to parties. They praise him for being easy to get along with. He can blend with any crowd, laugh with the loud ones, sip wine with the quiet ones, quote sports stats, or talk philosophy depending on the audience. But there's a price, because while everyone likes him, no one respects him. Meet Ray. Ray was the guy you wanted at your table, but never asked for advice. He was funny, charming, and impossible to dislike. But if you pressed anyone to describe what Ray actually believed, what mattered to him, where he stood, what lines he wouldn't cross, they'd draw a blank. Because Ray had spent his life being liked by everyone, but known by no one. He didn't lack opinions. He buried them. He didn't lack backbone. He simply refused to show it. Ray had learned early on that being agreeable kept things safe. No arguments, no confrontations, no enemies. But also, no weight. His friendships were wide but shallow. His voice filled the air but never landed. And when tough decisions had to be made, when character was tested, Ray wasn't chosen. Not because he was disliked, but because he didn't matter. He was liked the way people like a hotel concierge. Pleasant, helpful, forgettable. And the worst part? Ray knew it. He felt it in the way people talked over him, in how often they came to him for a favor, but never for truth. In the loneliness that followed every gathering, where he'd played the perfect role, but never been seen. One night, over a quiet beer, he said something most men never admit. If I died tomorrow, people would say I was a nice guy, and then forget me the next day. That's the curse of living for approval. You become harmless, you become predictable, you become a man others smile at, but never follow. Because people may like you for making them comfortable, but they only respect you when you make them think, and that takes conviction. The Stoics never taught men to be pleasant. They taught men to be principled. The opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject. Marcus Aurelius. In other words, why bend yourself for the praise of people who don't even know you? A Stoic man doesn't seek conflict, but he doesn't dodge truth. He doesn't agree just to be accepted. He doesn't soften every edge to blend in. He doesn't nod along when something feels wrong inside. Because he knows this. Being liked is easy. You just say what people want to hear. Being respected is hard. You have to speak truth, especially when it costs you. And that cost, it's real. Sometimes it's silence in a crowded room. Sometimes it's rejection. Sometimes it's walking alone. But it's also freedom. Because the man who dares to be disliked for standing firm, he sleeps well, he knows who he is, he earns the kind of respect that approval chasers never touch. Ray never understood that until it was too late, until he looked back and realized he had built his entire identity around avoiding disapproval. He didn't say what mattered, he said what was safe, and in doing so he lost his voice. Don't be that man, because here's the Stoic truth. When you live for approval, you shapeshift so much that one day you disappear. And when you finally try to speak up, no one listens because they've never heard your real voice before. If that hits you, good. It means you're still capable of choosing something different because you weren't made to be liked by everyone. You were made to be real, sharp, principled, even if that means standing alone. So ask yourself, would you rather be the man everyone likes or the man people remember? Because when the noise dies down, when the crowds move on, when the masks come off, only one thing matters: that you lived in truth, that you spoke with weight, that you stood firm when it counted. And that kind of man, he doesn't blend in, he stands out. Up next, a deeper crack in the armor. One you might not even notice until it's become a habit. The urge to explain yourself, to justify your boundaries, to ask permission for your own decisions. That's sign 5, and it's where approval seeking goes to die. This is true Stoic way, and we're not here to make you popular. We're here to make you undeniable. Sign 5. He explains every decision he makes. Watch what happens when he says no. It never stands on its own. It never lands clean. It arrives wrapped in disclaimers, in nervous smiles, in long-winded justifications. I'd really love to help, but I've got this thing, and I hate to say no, and I hope you understand. It keeps going and going until what started as a boundary becomes a performance. Not of strength, but of fear. This is the man who can't simply decline. He has to explain himself, to soothe every feeling, to make sure no one's upset. And what he's really saying, without saying it, is this: I don't believe my no is enough on its own. That's not courtesy. It's not humility. It's insecurity dressed up in polite language. And here's the dangerous truth. People sense it. They hear the hesitance in his tone. They see the way he rushes to justify himself. They notice the crack in the wall, and they push. They push for exceptions. They push for compromises. They push past his no because his no doesn't feel real. He says he's busy, then apologizes for it. He sets a boundary, then explains it into oblivion. And before long, he's backpedaling, agreeing, caving in. Because the moment a man starts selling his decisions, he opens the door for negotiation. But boundaries are not a business transaction. They don't need a PowerPoint. They don't require emotional approval. They stand because the man who set them knows why they matter. Meet dozens of men like this. You'll find them across every walk of life. They've been raised to believe that to say no, you must first earn the right. That unless someone agrees with your decision, it's not valid. That politeness is more important than clarity. But Stoicism flips that lie on its head. If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. Marcus Aurelius. No qualifiers, no explanations, just truth. A Stoic man doesn't ask for permission to protect his peace. He doesn't apologize for honoring his limits. He doesn't justify his decisions to people who never justify their demands. Because he understands this. Clarity is kindness. A clean, simple no, without guilt, without flinching, is more honest than an embellished explanation that tries to cushion the blow. It respects the other person's ability to hear the truth, and it protects the man's dignity in delivering it. But most men weren't taught that. They were taught to perform, to soften the blow, to add context, to apologize for wanting space, to make every no sound like a maybe just to avoid discomfort. And over time, that becomes the default. They over-explain when declining invitations, over-explain when leaving a toxic job, over-explain when setting a boundary with someone who has never earned the privilege of their vulnerability. And what does this pattern teach others? That his boundaries are negotiable, that if they just push a little harder, they'll get what they want. Because this man doesn't draw lines. He offers them for discussion. And slowly, people stop respecting his words. They stop taking him seriously. They start treating his no like a starting point for trade bargaining. What started as fear of seeming rude becomes a lifetime of being overrun. Let that sink in. Every time a man explains himself unnecessarily, he chips away at his authority, not just with others, but with himself. Because deep down, he begins to believe that unless people agree, his limits don't matter. But here's the Stoic truth. Your life is not a courtroom. You're not on trial every time you make a choice. You don't need unanimous approval to say no. You need courage. The courage to stand in silence after setting a boundary. The courage to disappoint people who expect you to fold. The courage to let your decisions breathe without smothering them with justification. Because a man who's always explaining it himself eventually trains the world to believe he's not sure of himself. And that doubt becomes his reputation. So here's the shift. Start treating your time, your values, and your limits like non-negotiables. You don't need to be harsh, but you do need to be final. I'm not available. That doesn't work for me. I've made my decision. No qualifiers. No, I wish I could. No, maybe next time. Just a calm, grounded truth. And if that makes someone uncomfortable, let it. That discomfort isn't your responsibility. You're not responsible for managing how people feel about your honesty. You're responsible for living in alignment with your values. That's Stoic strength. Measured, firm, unapologetic. So the next time you feel the urge to explain your no, pause. Ask yourself, am I saying this because it's necessary? Or am I afraid? Because once you stop performing, you'll start commanding respect without needing to demand it. And the people who matter, they'll get it. They'll adjust. They'll respect you more for being clear than for being endlessly accommodating. Coming up next, the sixth and final sign, the most corrosive of all, not just silence, not just over-explaining, but the quiet, dangerous habit of tolerating outright disrespect in the name of keeping the peace. And if that sounds familiar, it's time to draw the final line. This is true Stoic way. No noise, no drama, just truth and the strength to live by it. Sign 6. He tolerates disrespect in silence. It doesn't start with a slap in the face. It starts with a joke, one that cuts a little too deep. It starts with being left out of a conversation. It starts with someone interrupting, talking over, rolling their eyes as he speaks. And what does he do? He lets it slide, smiles, shrugs, pretends it didn't matter. It's fine. They probably didn't mean anything by it. Not worth making a scene over. But here's the thing. Disrespect never stops where it starts. It grows. Because disrespect is a test. People push to see what you'll tolerate. And if you don't push back, they learn you're safe to ignore. And once that message lands, once people know you won't speak up, you stop being a person they respect and start becoming a person they use. This man becomes the punchline in every room, the afterthought in every meeting, the one they take from without ever saying thank you. And he tells himself it's maturity. That rising above it makes him noble, that he's just picking his battles. But deep down, he knows the truth. He's not avoiding conflict. He's avoiding the pain of being seen as weak by the very people who already see him that way. Because make no mistake, silence isn't neutral. Silence is communication. When someone disrespects you and you say nothing, you're not keeping the peace. You're agreeing to the terms. You're saying, you can treat me this way and I won't stop you. And every time you do that, a little part of you dies, not dramatically, quietly, with every joke you laugh off, with every boundary you allow to be crossed, with every moment you stay silent when something inside you screams to speak. That's how men lose themselves. Not all at once, but in tiny passive sacrifices. He starts to doubt if he even deserves respect. He questions whether he's overreacting. He convinces himself it's easier to stay quiet than risk confrontation. And the people around him? They never stop, because he trained them not to. He trained them to ignore his discomfort, to walk past his limits, to treat him like background noise. And this isn't just frustrating, it's corrosive. Because when a man tolerates disrespect long enough, he forgets what self-respect even feels like. The Stoics saw this pattern for what it is, not weakness, but self-betrayal. He who does not prevent a crime when he can, encourages it. Seneca's strong words, and they apply here perfectly. When you don't stop the iron fence, you're not neutral. You're part of the system that allows it. And that means you're no longer just a victim of disrespect. You're a participant, because what you permit, you promote. What you ignore, you allow. And in time, that becomes your reputation. He won't speak up. He won't push back. He's just a nice guy. Don't worry about him. And the worst part? That's exactly how he starts to see himself. The man who tolerates disrespect too long doesn't just lose the respect of others. He loses his own. And when that's gone, everything else unravels. He becomes cynical, withdrawn, resentful of others, yes, but mostly of himself. Because part of him remembers the early moments where he could have spoken up, where he could have drawn a line, where he could have said, that doesn't work for me. Don't speak to me like that. This isn't okay. But he didn't. He bit his tongue. He told himself it wasn't a big deal. And now, years later, the deal is enormous. And the respect is gone. So how does he get it back? By understanding this, respect isn't demanded, it's enforced. Not with rage, not with ego, but with calm, unapologetic clarity. It's in the way you look a man in the eye and say, you crossed a line. It's in the moment you choose discomfort now, so resentment doesn't take root later. It's not about being combative, it's about being uncrossable. A Stoic doesn't chase respect. He creates the conditions for it, through presence, through principle, through a willingness to confront what must be confronted. Because here's the brutal truth. If you keep tolerating disrespect, the world will assume you prefer it. People aren't mind readers. They learn from what you allow. And if you're always taking the high road, if you're always keeping quiet to keep peace, you may win the silence, but you'll lose the soul. And that's not Stoic. That's surrender. So ask yourself, when someone crosses a line, what do? Do you call it out? Or do you smile and say nothing, then carry that sting with you for days? Because real strength is measured in moments like that. Not in how much you can take, but in when you finally stop accepting what never should have been offered in the first place. You were not made to absorb every slight. You were not built to endure every insult. You were made to discern, to respond, and when necessary, to walk away. Because silence doesn't protect your peace when it comes at the cost of your dignity. You don't have to yell, you don't have to fight, but you do have to speak, even if your voice shakes, even if it disrupts the room. Because the people worth keeping will respect the man who stands for himself. And the ones who don't, let them leave. You won't miss them. This was the final sign. But for many men, it's the one that hurts the most because it's been happening for years. So if any part of this series made your chest tighten or your jaw clench, good. That means you're still alive, still paying attention, still capable of reclaiming your strength. You don't have to keep being nice if it means being ignored. You can be calm and commanding. You can be kind and clear. You can be generous without being invisible. This is the path. This is the truth. This is the true Stoic way. If this spoke to you, don't just nod, subscribe, share it, and most of all, live it. Because from this point forward, you don't owe anyone your silence. You owe yourself your self-respect. Conclusion: a man who's too nice is not noble. He's not respected. He's not remembered. He's erased. Not because he lacks value, but because he never drew the line that said, "This is who I am. This is where I stop bending." Stoicism doesn't teach men to be cold. It teaches them to be clear, to live in truth, to stand with strength, and to stop fearing the cost of being disliked. Because a man who's respected isn't the one who pleases everyone. He's the one who never sells himself to be accepted. That's the difference, that's the standard, and that's what we're building here. This is true Stoic way. If you're tired of being agreeable at the cost of your identity, if you're ready to speak truth, hold ground, and reclaim your dignity, then subscribe now. This is not for the faint-hearted. This is for men who are done being forgotten. It's time to be heard. It's time to be respected. It's time to live without apology.